Hey there, and happy Friday to anybody that happens to be watching this. As I get across the road, hopefully I don't get hit by a car. Remember, kids, look both ways if we're crossing the street. Okay, so on the cusp of an eve of a day where the universe has changed to some degree, and if you don't know what's going on in the world, I suggest you check it out and draw your own conclusions, but that's not what the conversation is going to be about today. Today we're going to talk about the budget that happened in Saskatchewan a couple weeks ago. So I've sort of sat on this to see exactly what was going to happen in the long run, right? Because numbers are just numbers, and, pointing out what they think things need to be cut doesn't necessarily right off the bat say what's actually going to happen. Prime example is, the pushback they're seeing with STC, the pushback they're seeing within the education system, with certain programs being cut. So for those of you that have been following the things that I have said, I put a video out. I don't even know if it'll be on this Facebook page or if it's on my YouTube channel. Nonetheless, I talked about over the summer when Sask Party first started talking about SaskTel, and had proposed to the Saskatchewan people, we wouldn't sell them without a referendum, and yada yada yada. So what I had hypothesized at that time was that, to me, it really spoke like one of the biggest sales pitches I've ever seen in recent times. And that's basically the Saskatchewan people are being preemptively sold for the selling of SaskTel. And this budget even more clearly speaks to that. So, what I've seen, the reaction of the Saskatchewan people is, on the plus side, we like our social programs. We don't like to see people that need help go without being helped. And that seems to be kind of a general consensus about us, that, we need to be investing in these things. There is some protests going on, I think yesterday with the libraries, and last week we saw things with, the fringe areas of the education program that were going to be cut, and the ministers that come forward saying, no, we're not going to make those, but the money still needs to come from somewhere. For those of you that are in the education system, in my opinion, I think your EAs are honestly going to be what's going to get targeted next, and then it's up to you how much you want to fight for that and how much you're willing to lose in the classroom, because something's going to have to give, something needs to be paid for, which ties into what I'm going to talk about with SaskTel. So what I had hypothesized in my last video was simply this: is a good way for arguing for a sale in general, whether you're selling a company or you're selling a product, is to, sweeten the pot, show that the alternatives aren't quite as sweet as the deal that you're going to get. In this particular case, it all comes down to the budget, right? We're running a deficit. Things need to be paid for, or social programs need to be cut. And those programs are going to come out of the big sector, so health, education. They're not coming out of the corporate industries. They're not coming out of the mineral extraction industries. Those are the areas that they're going to be coming from. So what happens is people are going to be in a position to say, oh, hey, we don't want to have to sacrifice these services. Whereupon the government's response at the end of the day is simply going to be, well, if we're not going to pay for it this way, then we can pay for it that way. Which do you prefer? So that's something to keep in mind going forward, is that, this just sort of highlights to me that type of setup that's going on, because people can fight for the individual things that they want and lock those up so that they can hold the government accountable to say that you promised you wouldn't axe this program or axe that program. But the more you do that along the line, it comes to the point that there'll be things that you will have to budge on, or, the alternatives will be to start selling off things like the crown corporations and start moving towards more of a privatized model. And we all know that that's something that the Sask Party enjoys. They've looked at wanting to privatize parts of our healthcare. They've looked at wanting to privatize parts of our education system. This isn't news, right? I mean, best example, you want to talk about mineral extraction and things like that, instead of having Sask Energy get more involved in that area of things or what have you. And we have our premier of our province trying to bring in other out of province companies and oil industry executives and businesses into our province. But we're not going to talk about conflict of interest today, although that almost exactly sums up a conflict of interest. But that's a conversation for a whole other time. So yeah, I mean, kind of make the long and the short of things is, people didn't want to pay the PSD. That upset a lot of folks, and I get it. I understand, but people had to see this coming, right? There was a great opportunity for Saskatchewan to stack up money and to save it, and as a province, our government chose not to do so. And that's not entirely the government's fault, because the people chose to vote the people in that made those decisions. So there is some onus on the population, that helped guide those decisions to where we are now. Now, the nice side of things is that they promised to have I think it's a $300,000 a year buffer that they're wanting to save up for a rainy day fund. That's, in my opinion, is where the cuts that aren't going to happen due to civil outcry, the money's going to come from. So when we're talking about things like potential layoff of EAs, or we're talking about things like special needs programs, anything, libraries, all that sort of stuff, there's about a $300,000 buffer area that people can get away with and saying, no, we need these programs and we don't want to give them up. And the government will probably cave on that up until the point that there's no more rainy day fund. But then at that point, money needs to come from somewhere. The federal government isn't just going to give a bunch of money to the provincial government because we put ourselves in this situation. This isn't, something that came out of nowhere. A lot of people saw this coming years ago, Anyway, so those are just some food for thought for this Friday, and I hope you have a good weekend. It's supposed to be beautiful out, so get out in the outdoors, enjoy some of that sun, because winter will come again in 6 months, and we'll be back to minus 40 and 10 feet of snow in no time. So thanks for listening, and peace.